I remember being so nervous. I thought I was gonna poop my pants. This was a horrible idea. I let my students pick their desks, and honestly, looking back on it, I don't think I knew what I was doing. And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into? Welcome back to my channel, guys. A lot of you asked me to do a video on my first year of teaching, and I'm not gonna lie, that really scared me. I try really hard not to think back to that horrible time. No, I'm totally kidding. My first year was not that bad, but it was rough, it was really hard, and overall it was just a really big learning experience. The reason I'm making this video is because I know when I started my first year of teaching, I wanted to be the best at every part of teaching, and I was looking at veteran teachers who have been teaching 10, 15, 20 years, and I wanted to be exactly like them. I wanted to have the prettiest classroom, and I wanted to have the best lessons, and I wanted to have the best classroom management, and it's literally impossible your first year of teaching. I think it's really important for new teachers to know that everyone has to start somewhere, and everyone was a first year teacher at some point. I promise everything you experience your first year of teaching, from stress to classroom management issues to lesson planning questions, is all completely normal, and you are not alone. My hope is that by telling my first year of teaching story, at least one teacher or soon-to-be teacher will be able to relate to what I went through, and it will help them realize that everyone's first year of teaching is a hot mess, and that's nothing to be embarrassed about. I thought I would start off with the specifics, so some of the details of my first year of teaching. First of all, I graduated college in May of 2014. I was only 20 years old, I was practically a baby, and I got hired to teach second grade at a Title I school on July 31st of 2014. For that year, teachers had to report on August 19th, and students started on August 25th. I started that year with 21 students, and I ended with 22 students. I lost a total of 2 students, and then I gained 3 other students. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about setting up my classroom at the beginning of the year. I actually was lucky enough to see my classroom on the day of my interview. I ended up getting offered the position before I left, so the principal asked if I wanted to go see my classroom, and of course I said yes, because that was my dream come true. Like, I could not wait to see my first classroom. So I went in and I just very quickly looked at it, and I saw some of my team teachers' classrooms, but I didn't really get a lot of like measurements or anything like that. I essentially had 2.5 weeks from the time that I was hired until teachers had to report, and I used that time to go shopping. I bought a lot of bins for my classroom. I bought a carpet for my classroom. I spent time making a lot of labels for things. I made things like a clip chart and my rules posters. I also made my teacher toolbox, which I'll insert a picture of my first teacher toolbox up here. I also painted a stool, and I'll insert a picture of that over here, which I still use in my classroom today. I didn't go overboard though. At least I don't think I went overboard. Back then, the Target dollar spot, because at that time it was called the Target dollar spot, it was not as big of a deal as it is now, or at least it didn't seem like as big of a deal because I wasn't really following teachers on social media. I got most of my stuff at Dollar Tree, and I was able to fit everything I bought and everything I had prepared for my classroom in my car, and I took it to my classroom all in one trip. I did not get into my classroom to start decorating and setting stuff up until the day teachers had to report, which was August 19th. I may have been able to get in there sooner, I have no idea. Honestly, I'm one of those types of people where I don't like to speak up, I don't like to ask questions, so I never really asked administration. I just showed up on the day that we were supposed to show up. We did have some new teacher trainings that I had to go to a couple days prior, but the first day I actually got in my classroom was the first day teachers had to report on August 19th. My mom and dad ended up coming down, and they helped me move stuff into my classroom. They helped me set up bulletin boards. They helped me organize library books. I actually had a big bin of books that I kept at their house that I collected from yard sales. They brought those down, and they just helped me get stuff set up at the very beginning. Now, the teacher who was in my room previously, I'm pretty sure she just moved grade levels, or at least I think that's what had happened. So she didn't leave like a ton behind. I've seen where some teachers get in and the room is like filled with stuff. I had math manipulatives, which obviously I needed. I organized those into bins. There were a lot of like old files that she left behind, and honestly I was looking at them and I was like, I have no idea what any of these are for, because I didn't know the curriculum yet. So I just shoved them into a filing cabinet and didn't really touch them until the end of the year. Honestly, my classroom was pretty easy to put together because at that time I didn't have a lot of stuff. Right now my basement here in my townhouse is filled with stuff because over the past 2 years I've accumulated a lot. But when I first started out, I really didn't have a lot. I had gotten some bins to organize stuff. I had gotten a carpet, I had gotten like a bean bag, but that was pretty much it. So honestly, my room came together within like 3 or 4 days. I tried to go back and find pictures of my classroom from my first year, and I think I deleted them, which makes me so sad. But I do remember I had 2 bulletin boards. I'll insert a picture of one right here. I literally dedicated the entire bulletin board to displaying student birthdays, which was so stupid because it was such a waste of space. The other bulletin board, I had plans to like change it out monthly to display student work, which was a horrible idea because first of all, there was barely any room. Second of all, I am not changing out bulletin boards monthly. Like, those of you who have to do that, I feel for you because I hate bulletin boards. It's a love-hate relationship. I love bulletin boards because I do think they look really pretty and I like to put time into them, but I hate them at the same time because I don't have time to sit there and change them. So after my first year, I ended up changing that and I displayed student work all in the hallway, and I kept just a very general theme that I could keep all year long. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about open house, which is essentially meet the teacher night, if you've ever heard it called that. For us, it happened the week before school actually started for students. I'll be completely honest, I was nowhere near prepared for open house. I had no name tags out on desks. The only thing I had displayed for parents were these horrible flip books that I made. I'll insert a picture right here. I decided to just make my own flip books on Word and print them out and cut the pages and staple them, which was a horrible idea because there are much better templates on TPT if you guys want them. But I made my own, I printed it out. That was all that I really had displayed for parents. It had a little bit of information about like rules and procedures, but honestly, most of it I just kind of made up because I hadn't really figured it out yet. I remember being so nervous. I thought I was gonna poop my pants. Like, I was just so overwhelmed and I had no idea what to say to parents, and I was standing by the door like waiting for people to come in, but I had no idea what I was gonna even talk to them about. So overall, like, I was just a hot mess. I did have it set up so that parents would come in and they would visit stations. I had a station where they filled out transportation information about their student just so I could double check. I had a station where they filled out a student information sheet, which was stupid because no parent wants to sit there and fill out the entire thing. I definitely recommend sending them home instead. I had a station where my students, this was a horrible idea, I let my students pick their desks. Did not work out very well. I had a station where they could get like mints, and I'll insert a little picture. I thought it was cute and I had like a little rhyme to go with it, and I had like blow pops or something for the students. And then I had one more station, but I have no idea what it was. I also had a PowerPoint presentation that I had made like playing in the background. I have no idea if any of the parents even looked at it, but it was there. I only had maybe like 5 families show up. I didn't get to meet a lot of my kids before the first day, and I already had parents questioning me because they realized I was a first-year teacher. I tried to word it in my Meet the Teacher letter that it was my first year at that school rather than just saying it was my first year in general, but I definitely had parents who could tell because I was young and they were asking me when I graduated, and it wasn't really a great feeling for the beginning of the year already having parents questioning you. I did have parents switching their kids out of my classroom into other classrooms. I remember the secretary calling me and saying that so-and-so had been moved, and they told me it was to help balance like the demographics, but I knew that was a lie. I knew it was because I was a first-year teacher, which I understand because I do think there's a stigma that first-year teachers don't know what they're doing, and honestly, looking back on it, I don't think I knew what I was doing, but I will say after my first year, I had parents requesting me as their child's teacher, so it's all okay. Now I'm gonna talk a little bit about the first day of school. I knew I had to have something out on student desks for them to do as they came in, that way I could answer any questions or help any parents, and I decided to go with the word search because I didn't realize that word searches are actually kind of hard for second graders. I had this girl that was definitely testing me. She like crumpled up her word search, she told me how stupid it was and she wasn't gonna do it, and I was like, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into? Then as soon as I diffused that situation, I had a boy come in, he sat down on his desk, and I went over to like greet him, and he threw up all over my shoes. So I sent him to the nurse because obviously when a kid throws up, that's what you do. I sent him with a trash can because he had just thrown up. He goes to the nurse, he comes back and he goes, she sent me back because I didn't have a nurse pass. I had no nurse passes because it was the first day of school and I didn't know what I was doing. So I had to call her and I was like, look, this kid just threw up. I don't have any nurse passes, but can you please take care of him? Then I went through the basic like introduction of me as a teacher, and I had my kids do some icebreakers, and I started to go over like some rules and procedures, and then it was time for art. I went over how to get in a second grade line and my students practice, and we got into the hallway, and I suddenly realized I had no clue where the art room was. I thought I knew where it was. I had seen like a little plaque by one of the rooms that said art. So I said, okay, I'm just gonna walk my students there and I'm gonna cross my fingers that that's it. We get there and it's not the art room. So then I lie and I tell my kids that we're just practicing walking in the hallway. We did a couple laps until finally I saw another teacher and I had to like break down and be like, do you know where the art room is? And thankfully she told me it was out in the portables, which goodness knows I never would have found it on my own. So that was super embarrassing, just having my kids like witness that I had no clue what I was doing. I really don't remember a lot else from that day because it flew by. And if you're a first year teacher, don't worry so much about the first day because I promise you it will go by so fast and it will be over before you know it. I do remember reading the book First Day Jitters and giving my students jitter juice, which I have done every year since then because it's one of my favorite books. I also remember just going over basic procedures procedures and practicing walking in the line and all that kind of stuff, but I don't really remember a lot else. I did creep back on my Facebook and I actually found the status that I posted at the end of my first day of teaching, so I thought I would read it for you guys. I said, first official day of teaching complete, and I've never been more convinced that I was born for this. Next, I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the hardest moments for me as a first-year teacher. Overall, the hardest thing about your first year of teaching is just the fact that everything is brand new to you, and every single day you're doing something for the very first time. I had to figure out how to lesson plan in a way that was going to work for me. I had to figure out how to structure my math time. I had to figure out how to structure my reading time. I had to figure out how I wanted things to be done in my classroom because I didn't know exactly until I actually got in there. Yes, I had done my internship, but I had to go along with my mentor teacher and how she structured her classroom. And this time I was completely on my own, so I had the freedom to do things the way I wanted to do them, but I didn't know how I wanted to do them yet. Also, a really hard thing for me was learning how to ask for help because I'm a very independent person. I'm a perfectionist, and it was really hard for me to admit that I didn't really know what I was doing. I was struggling and I needed help. I also had a boy in my classroom who was very challenging because he was ADHD, but he wasn't consistently on medication. And when he was on medication, he was a rock star. And when he wasn't, he literally just could not function. And it was so hard for me throughout the year to try to adjust to that. I remember at one point it all built up and suddenly I felt so overwhelmed. I felt like I was reaching out for help and I wasn't getting any answers and I didn't know what to do. And I literally sat in my room alone with the door closed, lights out, and I was just bawling my eyes out. And my team teachers ended up coming in and they just sat and they were like, what do you need help with? And I didn't know, I didn't even know what to tell them that I needed help with. I just knew I was so overwhelmed, and they ended up, oh, I'm so thankful for them. They ended up walking me to my principal and they're like, look, we need to get her help. This isn't fair to her. We need to figure out a plan. And I'm just so incredibly grateful for them because I needed that in that moment. I didn't know how to reach out for help and they helped me with that. I remember going on my first field trip, which was to Washington, D.C. I was so not prepared at all. It was a 2-hour ride. The boy who was ADHD had no medicine that day. He was screaming at the top of his lungs on the bus. He ended up getting 3 nosebleeds on the way over and I had nothing to clean it up with. Thankfully, one of the other parent chaperones had tissues. And I remember getting there and we sat and we ate lunch and I had a student who had a glass bottle and they dropped it and it shattered, and I had to pick up the pieces of glass and I ended up getting glass in my hands and it was just a hot mess overall. I also had a set of twins join my room halfway through the year. I want to say it was in January. I had no warning. I just got a phone call saying I'm coming down with 2 new students. I was like, okay. I was not prepared at all, and honestly they just flipped the entire dynamic of my classroom. I finally felt like I was starting to get everything under control and I knew what I was doing, and then they came in and I felt like the rug had been pulled out from underneath of me and I lost all control again. And then a week after that, when I finally started to adjust, I had a girl who left my class and it hit me so hard, and still to this day it's been one of the most difficult things I've had to deal with. Long story short, she was actually being raised by her grandmother. Her dad had never really been in her life, and suddenly that year he decided he wanted to be, so she had been going up to see him once a month on the weekend. He ended up winning custody over her and she was given no warning. It was on a Friday before spring break. She had to leave that weekend to go up to New Jersey to live with him, and she ended up coming back into my classroom after everyone had been dismissed because her grandmother had just found out, and she just ran into the room and hugged me and just bawled and wouldn't let go. And it was so hard for me to deal with that. And even afterwards, my principal said, he's like, I've never seen a kid react like that and run to their teacher like that. And thankfully I did keep in contact with her. I actually went over her house the following couple weekends because she would still come once a month to visit with her grandmother. So I went back, I brought her a goodie bag. I had the kids all make this video for her, and I do still keep in contact with her grandmother, but it still was just one of those things that hit me really hard. I had another little girl who ended up leaving in the spring. Ironically, it was the same girl who crumpled up her word search on the first day of school and freaked out on me. She was a challenge for me all school year. I felt like I had to work so hard to try to break down her walls, and she didn't want to let me in, and she was just so mean towards me, and I knew she really loved me, but she didn't show it. I got a call one day randomly in the spring just saying that it was her last day with no warning, and it was very bittersweet because part of me was relieved because she was so challenging for me and I felt like I was trying so hard, but she just was not opening up to me. But at the same time, I knew that I was really gonna miss her. So she ended up leaving, and a couple weeks later she came back to visit, and I got a call from the office saying she was there, and I was like, oh boy. I went down to the office, and again, as soon as she saw me, she ran up, hugged me, and was just bawling her eyes out. So that was a very reassuring moment to me because obviously I did get through to her more than I realized. I also really had to adjust my first year to some of the poverty that my students were experiencing. I had no prior experience with that. My internship wasn't like that, and it was very eye-opening just seeing what some of my students were dealing with, and it's different when they're your kids in your class and you just care so much about them. But all of that aside, I thought I would talk quickly about some of my favorite moments from my first year. One of the things I remember doing that I loved because my students really loved it was contraction surgery. Since then, I've actually adapted it to be text-speech surgery, and I have that in my TPT store if you guys are interested. But my students were so into it. They loved playing doctors, and it was actually really, really easy for me to set up. I will insert a quick video clip here for you guys to see.
Let's do this. Don't die on us. Ma'am, please stay calm. The surgery is almost done.
Miss Ferré, are you at balls?
Since doing that my first year, I've done it every year because my students love it so much. Another moment that really touched my heart was when this little boy who came to me from Haiti, he knew no English whatsoever. He knew his name and he knew the word hello. He didn't know the alphabet. He didn't know how to read or write in English or in Haitian Creole. He actually ended up reading a book on his own by the end of the school year. And I remember when he first read it to me, I was so stinking proud of him. I had him come up, he put it under the document camera, he read it to the entire class. And when he finished, all of the students just broke out in applause and he was so happy and it made my teacher heart so happy. I will actually insert a quick video clip of it here.
L is for lion. L is for lizard.
I also remember a moment with the little girl who I told you about who like hated me and I could never get through to her. There was one moment where I told my class that I wasn't feeling well. I had a really sore throat. She ended up having lunch bunch with me that day and she had got me an ice cream from the cafeteria and I just thought that that was the sweetest thing ever. And that was definitely one of those moments where it's like, okay, I'm not doing so bad after all. Now I do have a couple of funny stories that I wanted to share. I actually went through my Facebook and I went through all of my statuses from my first year of teaching because I recorded a lot of these things so that I wouldn't forget them. So I went through and I found some funny stories I wanted to share with you all. All right, the first funny story was actually at the beginning of the school year. We had read Mrs. Brown Went to Town and I was gonna have my students debate whether or not the animals should have moved into her house while she was gone. So I remember asking my class, does anyone know what a debate is? So I had a boy very confidently raise his hand and I swear this was in all seriousness, like he wasn't trying to be funny, he thought this was the answer. He told me debate is what you use to catch the fish. I also had a student bring in a tail for my cat because my students knew at the time I only had Luna, my one cat. They knew she didn't have a tail and I had a boy bring in like a costume tail that you would wear for Halloween to give to my cat. I also remember having this little boy in my class and he was the funniest kid I've ever met. Everything he did was just hilarious. And he ended up getting the nickname Sneaky E. It's kind of a long story, but I was teaching my class about silent E, which we called Sneaky E. And he just happened to like really quietly come in the room while we were talking about that. So that became his nickname. Anyway, one day we were outside going to art and my students were really cold because it was in the winter and his ears were cold and he had a pair of gloves like in his pocket of his jacket and he ended up taking off the gloves and just like hanging them on his ears and it was hilarious. I also decided to implement a tattle monster because my students were really struggling with tattling on each other. I'll insert a little picture of it right here. I thought it was a great idea at first. Then the same week that I implemented it, my students ended up doing this little like play in the class. We were reenacting some of the famous explorers and I had like uncooked rice to act as snow and we had sprinkled it over top of the kids' heads. Later that day, I ended up checking the tattle monster and I had 5 little slips of paper that told me that one of the students had ate the rice. Every single paper I took out of there was like, Joe ate the rice, Joe ate the rice, Joe ate the rice. And no, his name wasn't Joe, but still, it just cracked me up. I also remember a student asking me, does your boyfriend like your glasses? And I said, yes, he does. And the student responded with, do you know your boyfriend lies to you sometimes? Going along with that unit on explorers, I remember asking my students at the beginning of the unit if they knew any famous explorers, and I had a student tell me Dora and Diego. Finally, I remember doing a whole group lesson with my students. They were all up on the carpet. I kid you not, I turned my back for no more than 5 seconds. I turned back around and the same little kid who I told you about, his nickname was Sneaky E, he had pulled out his pockets from his pants and tied them together in front of him like a belt. No idea why, don't know how he did it that quickly, but he did. I told you guys that I went back through my Facebook and I actually found the status that I posted at the very end of the school year and I wanted to read it to you all because it summed up the year perfectly. My first year of teaching is officially over and it's incredibly bittersweet. As I leave my classroom for the last time this summer, I feel like an entirely different person than when I entered the room in the fall. Here are some of the most important things I've learned. Number 1, always have nurse passes on hand. You never know when a student might throw up. Yes, even all over your desk. That also happened. Number 2, at least one student will accidentally call you mom on a daily basis, and it will never cease to make you smile. Number 3, you will use a big chunk of your paychecks to buy snacks or food for your students to take home over breaks when you know they don't get a lot of meals at home and not think twice about it. Number 4, you will tie more shoes, pull out more teeth, and button more pants and shirts than you ever thought possible. Number 5, Band-Aids, wet paper towels, and ice packs that weren't even in the freezer can fix more than you could ever imagine. Number 6, it's extremely hard to hold back laughter when a student farts while the class is silent. Number 7, kids have no boundaries when you're reading to them on the carpet. Why yes, I am a runner and I have calluses on my toes. Please stop picking at them. Number 8, kids are brutally honest. You will get plenty of, you look beautiful today, but you will also get plenty of, did you just roll out of bed today? Why yes, I did. Thank you for noticing. Number 9, kids are resilient. Some of my students have faced more challenges in their short 7 years than I have my entire life, but will always come in with a smile on their face. Number 10, teaching is by far the most rewarding career anyone could ever experience. Now I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about things that I would do differently if I could go back to my first year of teaching. Okay, the first thing is not really anything important, but I decided to go with like a Hawaiian theme my first year of teaching, and I had gotten this grass skirt from Party City and I had hot glued it around my desk to decorate it. Horrible choice because my students always sat by it on the carpet, they pulled on it, it came down at least 20 times, and I spent so much time hot gluing it back on the desk and it just wasn't even worth it. The second thing was how I organized student jobs. I'll insert a picture of my job chart up here. I decided to create these little pockets and my students each had a stick with their number on it, and I would put it in the pocket when they had that job. I let my students pick jobs every single week, and it was a horrible idea because none of them got enough experience with the job to actually do it well. After that, I changed it so that my students only changed jobs once a quarter, and it worked so much better. Not to mention, all of those pockets were totally ripping off the chart by the end of the school year. The third thing I would change is that I had no morning routine. My students have about a half an hour in the morning where they would come in, eat breakfast, write in their agendas, and I didn't really have that time very structured, so my students were talking, they were misbehaving the entire time, and thank goodness for my new teacher coach. She told me, she was like, sit down, make a poster with their morning routine, and I'll insert a picture here. I ended up making it very structured so they had a numbered list of what to do. I created a cute little rhyme about if they wanted to talk, they had to do it out in the hall, which after that I ended up changing that so my students didn't talk at all in the mornings, but it was just a hot mess until I had it fully organized. The next thing I would change is that I never really stuck to any one classroom management system. I was constantly trying to change it up, but I wasn't really giving it enough time to actually work, and I wasn't being consistent enough for any of those programs to actually work. I started off the year using a clip chart, but I had it in the back of the classroom. I was never using it. My students didn't even know what it was for. I never fully explained it well. Then I decided to use Class Dojo, but I wasn't really consistent with that. Like, I gave points every once in a while, and it wasn't until my second year of teaching that I decided to combine the two, and it worked so much better for me. The next thing I would change is that I spent a lot of time trying to do these cute activities that I had seen on Pinterest that weren't really benefiting my students. Like, yes, they were cute, yes, they were fun, but they weren't really like instructional, or they weren't as instructional as they should have been. So if I could go back, I definitely would have spent less time doing the cutesy things and more times making sure my students were actually learning what they needed to learn. I also spent time over the summer creating things that I didn't even end up using in my classroom. I created them because they were cute and I'd seen them on Pinterest and I saw other teachers were using them. And then I got into my own classroom and I realized I did not need them at all. I ended up creating this bin that had like brain breaks on sticks and it had cute little labels. Never, ever, ever used them because I started using Go Noodle and I didn't need to have these sticks because it was all online. I also created this quiet spray that I had seen on Pinterest and I taped a label onto this like empty squirt bottle. Never ended up using it. It literally has sat on the shelf. I still have it because I do think it's cute, but it never gets used in my room. I was so caught up on wanting to be this perfect teacher that I had imagined being my entire life, but I wasn't ready yet. Like, it was my first year. I didn't know what I was doing, and it was really hard for me to accept that things weren't going to be perfect until I got more experience. Finally, I thought I would end with some tips for first-year teachers. The first one goes with exactly what I was just saying. Don't focus on perfection your first year, focus on improvement and growth. I personally think it's best to pick like one subject area every year and become an expert at it. Devote your entire year to professional development, reading books, getting information so that you can be the best teacher in that subject area, and then the next year pick another area. Honestly, your first year, I would focus on classroom management because you cannot teach until you have classroom management in place. So spend your first year really researching classroom management, trying out different strategies, figuring out what works best for you so that your next year you can be a pro at classroom management and you can start to focus on a different subject area. My second tip is don't worry about your classroom looking perfect. Do not go on social media and look at these pictures of teachers that have been teaching 5, 10, 20 years and they have these Pinterest perfect classrooms. It's not going to happen your first year, and honestly it shouldn't, because that's not what's important. Honestly, all of the stuff that I prepped for my classroom my first year, all of the posters, all of the cute little signs, all of the labels, all of the organizational bins, I pretty much threw out after my first year because I realized it just didn't fit me as a teacher, and I had only done it because I had seen other teachers do it. Wait until you get more experience and I promise you will get all of your classroom stuff figured out exactly the way you want it, but it takes time. Do not spend thousands of dollars your first year because you want your classroom to look like these teachers who have been teaching for much longer than you. It will get there, I promise, but you have to be patient. Invest a little bit more each year, get a little bit more for your classroom, and I promise within a couple years, you will have more stuff than you know what to do with anyway. I do plan on making a video all about the best things that I recommend spending money on your first year, because yes, you are gonna have to spend some money. There are gonna be things you need to invest in, but some of them are a lot more necessary than others. So I will make a video all about my best recommendations for you. The next tip I have for you is realize that you don't know what you don't know. Don't stress yourself out by trying to prepare for your first year of teaching and trying to get all of your questions answered. Some of it will just come in experience, and unfortunately, there's nothing you can really do. There's gonna be times where you have to just sink in order to learn from it, and that's okay. It's okay to struggle your first year. It's okay to not know what you're doing, but it's not okay not to look for the answers. So focus your first year on just improving and growing, and I promise it will get better in time. You don't have to know everything going into it because that's impossible. My next tip for you is to be open to feedback. You have to be willing to admit that your way may not be the best way, and the way you thought you had to manage your classroom may not work and you might have to change it. The way you thought to teach a certain subject may not work and you might have to change it. It's okay. Be willing to get feedback. Be willing to ask for advice from your team teachers and other teachers in the school and your administration. My next tip is to be flexible. I promise you, when you have your day as organized as possible, it's not gonna go that way, and it's okay. Be flexible. Know that your schedule is gonna change. Know that your lesson plans sometimes just don't go the way you thought they would. It's okay. That's part of teaching, and honestly, that never really goes away. My next tip for you is to spend any time that you have before your first year of teaching and even during your first year of teaching, researching the standards, getting professional development. Focus on being a good teacher rather than trying to make your room look cute. Your first priority is educating your students, helping them learn, helping them grow. Yes, your room does play a factor in that because you want it to be a warm and inviting place for your students, but honestly, your room doesn't matter if you suck at actually teaching. Spend your time focusing on actually improving as a teacher and being able to deliver content in the best possible way for your students, and your classroom can come later. My next tip is to build a support system. Your first year of teaching is going to be overwhelming. It's going to be stressful. It's going to be hard. It just comes with the program. So make sure you have a good support system, whether it's your team teachers or other teachers at your school, or even teachers on social media that you haven't met in real life, but they understand what you're going through. Find people that are gonna be positive with you, and they're gonna build you up when you need it, because I promise you, you will need it. My next tip for you is to keep a journal. Now, this one isn't really important in terms of teaching, but it is something you will want to look back on. I promise you, you're gonna want to write down those funny stories, and you're gonna want to write down those things that are keeping you going, because there will be moments where you're questioning your career choice, and it's important to have that to look back on. Plus, 5, 10, 15 years from now, you will love to look back on your first year of teaching. My next tip is to be prepared to get sick a lot, because I promise no matter how much you've been around kids your entire life, your first year of teaching, I don't know what it is, but you will get sick so many times. My next tip kind of goes along with that. Make sure that you take time for yourself. Make sure you are getting enough sleep. I promise your to-do list is never going to end. You're always going to have more stuff to do, so you have to know when to cut yourself off. Take time for yourself. Take personal days. That's not a bad thing. Teachers are given personal days for a reason. It's okay to take a mental health day if you need it. And also, kind of piggybacking off of that, you might want to have sub-plans prepared, because you never know know when something might happen and you might have to call out with a moment's notice, so make sure that you have plans ready to go. I hope that you found this video helpful, and I hope that if you are a first-year teacher or you're about to be a first-year teacher, it made you feel a little bit more at ease. If you did find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. That helps it to be able to reach more teachers. If you haven't watched my previous video called Pocketful of Positivity, I highly suggest you check it out. I do have a giveaway going on through this Sunday. Don't forget to subscribe to me if you haven't already so you don't miss any future videos, and while you're at it, go ahead and go to my channel, click the little bell that is next to the subscribe button so that you get notified every time I post a new video. As always, thank you for watching. I love you all so much. Don't forget to stay positive, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of this video and for supporting my YouTube channel. If you want to check out any of my older videos, you can use the 2 links right down here. If you want to subscribe to me so you don't miss any future videos, you can use the link right up here. The links to all of my social media sites and my Teachers Pay Teacher store are down in the description box for you, and I will catch you guys in the next one.